Scientists were stunned by what a CT scan revealed inside an Egyptian pharaoh's mummy. Hey, have you ever wondered what would happen if a set of human remains buried underground for 850,000 years forced scientists to rewrite the history of human evolution? What could make a 2,600-year-old mummy suddenly reveal that its owner had been brutally murdered with an axe, even though that secret had remained buried for thousands of years? And why was an ancient warrior laid to rest alongside treasures of gold and silver, a prized warhorse, and a ceremonial wreath of power, as if death were merely the beginning of a new journey? Hello everyone, and welcome back to Ancient History, where we uncover the forgotten chapters of the past, explore civilizations long lost to time, and investigate the mysteries that modern science is still struggling to solve. You know, every time an archaeologist's shovel breaks the ground, they're not just hoping to uncover a few valuable artifacts. Sometimes, what they discover is an entire story, capable of changing everything humanity once believed to be true. It could be a mummy whose hair has remained perfectly preserved for nearly 2,000 years, skeletal remains displaying the features of a previously unknown human species, or a richly furnished tomb filled with priceless treasures that raises far more questions than answers. In today's journey, we're going to explore some of the most astonishing archaeological discoveries that have shaken the scientific world. Every artifact, every skeleton, and every tomb is like another missing piece of history, revealing part of the truth while concealing countless other secrets. And who knows, by the time you've finished watching this video, you may find yourself asking a question of your own. Is the history we know really the whole story? Or are there still enormous secrets lying silently beneath the earth waiting for the day they're finally brought to light? So, are you ready? If you are, let's get started. The Egyptian pharaoh's mummy revealed a horrifying death that hid the truth for over 3,000 years. My friends, have you ever imagined that a mummy lying silently inside its coffin for more than 3,000 years could speak more powerfully than any historical record ever written? Even more chilling is the fact that the truth it revealed turned out to be completely different from what people had believed for centuries. If you've never thought about that before, then today, let's travel back to ancient Egypt, where a pharaoh named Seqenenre II remained shrouded in mystery for more than 3 millennia, until modern CT scanning technology, on February 17, 2021, unexpectedly uncovered the horrifying truth hidden inside his coffin. But to truly understand the magnitude of this discovery, we need to go back to the moment his mummy was first found. In 1886, archaeologists discovered the mummy of Pharaoh Seqenenre II in the ancient city of Thebes, now part of Luxor, Egypt. As soon as they opened the coffin, they immediately noticed something unusual. The body was in terrible condition. It emitted a strong, foul odor. Many of the bones had become disarticulated, and there were clear signs suggesting that the mummification process had been carried out hastily. At the time, however, scientific technology was still limited. Researchers could only examine the mummy externally and propose that the pharaoh might have died in battle or been assassinated during an internal coup. The mystery then remained unsolved for more than a century. It wasn't until 2021, when scientists performed a modern CT scan on the mummy, that the full story finally came to light. The three-dimensional analysis from multiple angles left researchers stunned. The pharaoh's skull contained numerous severe injuries, revealing that he had suffered an exceptionally violent death. Most notably, there was a deep slash across his forehead measuring approximately 2.8 inches, likely inflicted by an axe or a sword. That wound alone would have been enough to cause instant death. But that wasn't all. Just above his right eye was another sharp wound, measuring about 1.3 inches, also determined to have been caused by a bladed weapon. Additional injuries were found on his nose, right cheek, and around his eye socket, indicating that he had been attacked repeatedly from multiple directions. Even more horrifying, the left side of his skull contained a deep puncture wound measuring about 1.4 inches. Researchers believe it was inflicted by a spear or another long weapon thrust upward from below, possibly penetrating a vital region of the brain. This was almost certainly the fatal blow. After piecing together all of the evidence, scientists proposed a shocking theory. Seqenenre II did not simply die on the battlefield. Instead, he may have been surrounded, captured, and brutally executed. One particularly chilling detail made the story even more disturbing. The mummy's arms were found tightly flexed, showing no signs of defensive wounds or attempts to protect himself. This has led many experts to suspect that he may have been bound before he was killed. Modern archaeologists also discovered evidence that the ancient Egyptians had carefully stitched some of the wounds on his skull before the mummification process began. This suggests that his body was not embalmed in haste. Instead, there was a deliberate effort to restore the king's appearance after his death. Even more remarkably, his dried brain had shifted to one side of the skull, indicating that his body may have remained lying on its side after death or during transportation to the embalming site. So, what really happened to this pharaoh? According to historical records, second-En-Retah II ruled southern Egypt around 1558 BC, during a time when northern Egypt was occupied by the Hyksos, who had come from the Levant. Their occupation plunged Egypt into a long and bloody war. An ancient legend even claims that the conflict began over what seemed to be a trivial matter. The Hyksos king allegedly complained about the noise made by hippopotamuses in a sacred lake at Thebes. From this seemingly absurd dispute came an order to destroy the sacred lake, an act that was regarded as the final straw that ignited the war. During that conflict, second-En-Retah II is believed to have personally led his forces against the Hyksos. In the end, he fell in battle, or perhaps after being captured, leaving behind a mysterious death that remained unsolved for thousands of years. Yet Egypt's story did not end with his tragedy. After his death, his wife, Ahotep I, assumed the role of regent and continued the resistance against the Hyksos. Their son, Ahmose I, eventually defeated the Hyksos completely, reunified Egypt, and ushered in the new kingdom, the most glorious era in the nation's history. And so, from what seemed to be nothing more than a silent mummy, modern technology has allowed us to hear a story filled with bloodshed, war, and tragedy, a story that had remained buried for more than 3,000 years. Broken weapons in an ancient Chinese tomb shocked the archaeological world. A sword, a dagger, or a weapon once used to kill on the battlefield, could it actually be killed a second time inside an ancient tomb? It sounds strange, doesn't it? Yet during an archaeological excavation announced in mid-March 2022, researchers discovered exactly that in Shanxi Province, northwestern China. The finding prompted scholars to rethink how ancient people viewed war and peace. The story begins at an ancient cemetery dating back to the Western Zhou dynasty, approximately 1046 to 771 BC, located near the outskirts of Xi'an, once the ancient capital of China. This was not a single tomb, but an entire burial complex consisting of 13 separate tombs, surrounded by deep moats and numerous burial pits. And what made the discovery so remarkable? Inside these tombs, archaeologists uncovered a large number of broken bronze weapons, including daggers, combat knives, and various other types of military weapons. At first, many believed the damage was simply the result of warfare or thousands of years of natural deterioration. However, after conducting a more detailed analysis, archaeologist Yu Pengfei of the Shanxi Academy of Archaeology reached a completely different conclusion, one that left the scientific community in thoughtful silence. According to him, these weapons had not been broken during battle or damaged by the passage of time. Instead, they had been deliberately broken by people as part of the burial ceremony. Yes, you heard that correctly. The ancient people intentionally destroyed these weapons. But why would they do such a thing? The answer lies deep within ancient Chinese philosophy, particularly in the concept known as Zi Ge Wei Wu, which can be loosely translated as, the highest form of martial virtue is to bring war to an end. According to the Zuo Zhuan, one of China's classical historical texts compiled around the 3rd century BC, warfare was never regarded as the ultimate expression of glory. Instead, knowing when to stop fighting and lay down one's weapons represented the highest moral ideal. From this perspective, breaking weapons before placing them inside a tomb was not an act of destruction. Rather, it was a deeply symbolic ritual, transforming instruments of death into burial offerings so that the deceased could leave this world free from violence. But the story doesn't end with philosophy. From an archaeological standpoint, the Shanxi site is equally significant, because it represents one of the clearest cases in which physical evidence recovered from underground directly corresponds with historical accounts recorded in the Zhuojuan. In other words, what had existed for centuries only in ancient texts has now been confirmed through actual archaeological artifacts. Alongside the broken weapons, archaeologists also uncovered numerous grave goods, including three-legged bronze vessels, wash basins, and everyday ceramic cooking pots. These discoveries indicate that the site was far more than a simple burial ground. It reflected an elaborate system of funerary rituals as well as the sophisticated social beliefs of the Western Zhou people. Looking at the broader historical context, however, the Western Zhou period was far from peaceful. Although the dynasty was founded on the concept of the mandate of heaven, the belief that the right to rule was granted by heaven, the kingdom soon descended into turmoil following the death of King Wu of Zhou around 1043 BC. Power struggles among members of the royal family erupted, gradually turning the kingdom into a fragmented landscape filled with conflict. These turbulent events were recorded in the Zhuojuan, and now remarkably, they are echoed once again through the archaeological evidence uncovered in the ancient tombs of Shanxi. 3 ancient tombs, beneath a student dormitory in Rome, contained strange objects that left archaeologists stunned. Beneath the site of a future student dormitory, a place where people would one day walk, study, and go about their daily lives, lay an ancient cemetery more than 1,800 years old, completely unknown to the modern world. It sounds like something straight out of a movie, doesn't it? But this actually happened in 2023 in the Via Ostiense district, south of Rome, Italy, near the famous Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls. What makes this discovery even more remarkable is that it wasn't part of a planned archaeological expedition. Instead, it was a preventive excavation ordered by Italy's Ministry of Culture before construction began on a new student dormitory. At the time, no one imagined that beneath what seemed like ordinary ground lay a mystery that had remained buried for nearly 2,000 years. It wasn't until archaeologists began digging deeper that they uncovered a previously undocumented section of the ancient Ostiense necropolis, a cemetery first identified in 1919 but never fully excavated. There, they discovered 3 remarkable tombs, dating back roughly 1,800 years to the Roman Empire. Of course, what caused everyone to stop wasn't simply the age of the tombs, it was what was found inside them. Each tomb contained a human skeleton buried in what appeared to be a fairly ordinary manner. However, one unsettling detail immediately caught the attention of archaeologists. Every skeleton had an iron nail placed directly on its chest. Can you picture that? A cold piece of iron resting squarely on the body of the deceased, and it clearly wasn't there by accident. According to archaeologist Diletta Manganello of the Special Superintendency of Rome under Italy's Ministry of Culture, this was a funerary custom that had been well documented during the Roman period and continued into later eras. The ancient Romans believed that the iron nail was far more than a decorative object or part of a burial ritual. It carried a very specific purpose, protecting the living from the dead and the dead from the living. In simpler terms, they believed that placing an iron nail on the chest of the deceased would prevent that person's spirit from returning to the world of the living, stopping it from becoming a frightening supernatural being or a wandering soul capable of causing harm. Pretty chilling, isn't it? But the story doesn't end with those 3 unusual tombs. As the excavation expanded, archaeologists uncovered many more well-preserved burials from the same period, along with an extraordinarily complex funerary architectural system. They identified a group of 5 Roman imperial funerary structures, buried only about 3.3 feet below the surface. The buildings were aligned along a northeast to southwest axis, featured rectangular floor plans, and were topped with vaulted ceilings. In front of them stood 2 smaller structures, while another building had been constructed at a right angle, creating a layout that was clearly intentional rather than random. It resembled a carefully planned cemetery complex. And that's not all. Nearby, archaeologists also uncovered a semicircular hall and a large brick-built chamber that still preserved traces of its original stone mosaic floor. Unfortunately, the exact purpose of these structures remains unknown. Researchers continue to excavate and analyze the site in hopes of better understanding the role these buildings played within the ancient cemetery. Looking at the site as a whole, archaeologists came to an important realization. This wasn't simply an ancient graveyard. It was a physical record of Rome's layered history. The area began as a relatively simple cemetery before gradually expanding into increasingly elaborate burial complexes during late antiquity. Some tombs were even constructed immediately beside or directly above earlier burials, separated by walls built from volcanic stone, almost as if each chapter of history had been frozen beneath the ground. Think about that for a moment. Directly beneath the place where modern workers were preparing to build a student dormitory, a place where future students would live and study, lay an entirely different world, one shaped by beliefs about life, death, and the human soul nearly 2,000 years ago. So here's the question: were those iron nails truly meant to protect people? Or were they simply a reflection of the ancient Romans' fear of things they could never fully understand? What do you think? Do you have your own answer? As for me, I have to admit that even now I'm still not entirely sure what to believe. 37 human skeletons in Laos's Plain of Jars reveal a 1,000-year-old mystery that remains unsolved. My friends, have you ever stood in the middle of a quiet field, looked at enormous stone jars scattered across the hills, and wondered who made these and what was really inside them? It's a difficult question to answer. In fact, it almost sounds like the beginning of a legend, doesn't it? Yet this is one of Southeast Asia's greatest archaeological mysteries. It wasn't until a series of excavations carried out between 2022 and 2024 on the Zhengkoang Plateau in northern Laos that scientists finally began moving closer to an answer. Stretching across rolling grasslands, forests, and peaceful valleys, the region of Zhengkoang is home to thousands of gigantic stone jars. Some stand taller than an adult, while others weigh several tons. They are scattered across the landscape as though someone deliberately placed them there in a distant age long forgotten. For nearly a century, no one knew their true purpose. Some believed they were used to store water. Others suggested they were fermentation vessels for rice wine. There were even theories that they served as ancient grain storage containers. Everything began to change when archaeologists expanded their excavations at Site 75. Located about 43.5 miles northeast of Phonsavan during research campaigns conducted between 2022 and 2024. There, they opened one particularly remarkable stone jar, known simply as Jar Number 1. The jar stands approximately 4.3 feet tall, with a base measuring more than 6.6 feet across. But what astonished everyone wasn't an artifact, it was human remains. Even more surprising, it wasn't just one individual. Across the entire excavation associated with this stone jar complex, archaeologists identified the remains of at least 37 people. Yes, you heard that correctly. 37 individuals had rested silently among these giant stone jars on the Laotian Plateau for more than 1,000 years. As scientists examined the remains more closely, they noticed something extraordinary. The skeletons had not been placed inside the jars as complete bodies. Instead, the bones had been arranged deliberately. Long bones had been carefully positioned along the inner edges of the jars, while fragments of skulls had been grouped together separately. Smaller bones were scarce, suggesting they had been intentionally removed during the burial process. This led researchers to an important conclusion. These were examples of secondary burials. In other words, the deceased were not placed into the jars immediately after death. Their bodies had first been allowed to decompose elsewhere, after which the bones were carefully collected and transferred into the jars as part of a special ritual. But the story doesn't end there. During the excavation, archaeologists also found evidence suggesting that some of the skeletal remains had been rearranged by hand. In a few cases, the connection between the skull and the jawbone was still intact, almost as though the body had originally been placed inside while it was still relatively complete. Even more intriguing, at least 2 individuals showed clear signs of intentional tooth extraction, an act believed to have been part of a ritual or religious practice rather than the result of natural causes. So who were these people? Where did they come from? And how were they able to create an entire landscape filled with enormous stone jars in the middle of this remote plateau? The artifacts found alongside the human remains have provided some fascinating clues. Among the 37 individuals, researchers recovered 20 glass beads. Chemical analysis revealed that these beads came from a remarkably diverse range of places. Some originated in South Asia, particularly southeastern India. Others showed connections to the Middle East. Still others suggested links to southeastern China or northern Vietnam. These discoveries point to a remarkable conclusion. The plain of jars was far from isolated. Instead, it appears to have been part of an extensive trade network stretching across ancient Asia. Yet the question that continues to puzzle researchers is something else entirely. To this day, archaeologists have not found any settlement large enough to explain who built these massive stone jars, or how they transported multi-ton stone blocks onto this remote plateau. Radiocarbon dating indicates that these burials were used between approximately AD 890 and AD 1160, spanning nearly 270 years. That means this wasn't a site used only once. It was a ceremonial place that people returned to generation after generation. Many researchers now believe it may have served as an ancestral shrine or a family burial site, where communities honored and preserved the memory of their deceased relatives over centuries. So, from what once appeared to be nothing more than a silent field, Sheng Kuang has revealed a mystery that has endured for more than 1,000 years. These giant stone jars were likely far more than simple containers, as many once believed. They may have formed part of a sophisticated spiritual and ceremonial system, where life and death remained connected across generations. Isn't that both astonishing and fascinating? 2,100-year-old skeleton, wearing an exquisite golden wreath discovered in Bulgaria. The story began recently when a construction crew was preparing the ground for a solar park project in the Sakar Mountains of southeastern Bulgaria. The moment an excavator struck an unusual underground structure, work came to an immediate halt. Archaeologists were quickly called to the site. And you know what? The instant they descended into the excavation, they were met with a sight so astonishing that the entire team fell silent. Before them lay the skeleton of a Thracian warrior, buried with extraordinary honor and respect. Beside him rested the remains of his warhorse, the faithful companion that had once carried him into battle more than 2 millennia ago. But the greatest surprise was the treasure buried alongside him. Gold, silver, bronze, finely crafted jewelry, weapons of war, ceramic vessels, imported glassware, all of it had been placed within a single tomb. It was a display of wealth so extraordinary that even many neighboring civilizations of the same era would have found it impressive. Researchers from the National Archaeological Institute with Museum of Bulgaria, led by Dr. Daniela Agre, quickly began investigating the discovery. They gave the mysterious individual a fitting title, the Lord of Sakar. Preliminary analysis indicates that the man was between 35 and 40 years old when he died and lived during the late Hellenistic period, around 150 to 100 BC. This was a time when Thrace was heavily influenced by Greek culture, just before the region came under Roman rule. That cultural blending is clearly reflected in the remarkable burial ritual. Did you notice one particularly fascinating detail? Resting on top of the warrior's skull was a silver wreath covered with gold plating. In Hellenistic society, wreaths like this were never ordinary ornaments. They were reserved for leaders, powerful figures, or individuals honored for extraordinary achievements. That tells us something very important. This man was far more than an ordinary warrior. The tomb also contained numerous other valuable artifacts, including silver bracelets, rings, brooches, iron spears, a battle shield, and, most notably, a Greek-style spear adorned with gemstones, a weapon that symbolized both military strength and elite social status. Even his horse received a burial worthy of a true warrior. Its bridle and saddle were decorated with gold, silver, and bronze, featuring scenes inspired by Greek mythology. Among the most striking decorations was the image of Hercules battling a giant monster, a timeless symbol of strength and victory. On the horse's head, archaeologists also discovered a small golden snake-shaped ornament, an object believed to have carried sacred religious significance in the ancient world. Clearly, the Thracians regarded their war horses as far more than transportation. To them, the horse was an extension of the warrior's very soul. Nearby, archaeologists uncovered another tomb belonging to a noblewoman who lived during the early 2nd century BC. Although her burial was not as lavish as that of the Lord of Sakar, it still contained a remarkable collection of artifacts, including 2 pairs of perfectly preserved leather shoes, a beautifully carved wooden chest, and numerous objects made of gold, glass, and bronze. Think about what we've uncovered within this relatively small area. Together, these discoveries reveal an entire portrait of ancient Thracian society, from powerful warriors and their loyal horses to members of an elegant and sophisticated aristocracy. 11 300,000-year-old skeletons reveal humans in the middle of evolving into modern people. Have you ever wondered what would happen if scientists one day uncovered evidence suggesting that the story of human evolution isn't exactly what we've always been taught? And what if that were actually true? Let's travel back to 2024 and find out. Between April and November 2024, during the latest excavation at Hualongdong Cave in Dongji County, Anhui Province, China, archaeologists uncovered 11 ancient human skeletons buried deep within an excavation area measuring only about 430 square feet. At first glance, it might seem like nothing more than the discovery of a few additional fossilized skeletons. But as researchers began studying the remains, they realized they were standing before a discovery that could fundamentally change the way we understand our own origins. You see, scientific analysis indicates that these skeletons are approximately 300,000 years old. Time has not left them completely intact, but many crucial bones, including skulls, femurs, foot bones, and numerous other skeletal fragments, have been preserved in remarkably good condition. Those surviving pieces have opened the door to a series of questions that scientists are still trying to answer today. Many of you might be thinking, so what? They're just a few more ancient skeletons. But that's before you learn what makes them truly extraordinary. These individuals don't appear to belong entirely to any known human species. Detailed analysis revealed an unusual combination of anatomical features. Some parts of their skeletons still display characteristics typical of Homo erectus, commonly known as upright man. At the same time, other features are beginning to resemble those of Homo sapiens, our own species. Put simply, they appear to stand halfway between two major milestones in human evolution. They were no longer completely Homo erectus, yet they were not fully Homo sapiens either. It's almost as if nature was creating a transitional version of humanity right before our eyes. Even more fascinating, these findings closely match another famous discovery made at Hualongdong Cave back in 2015. At that time, scientists uncovered the skull of a teenage girl who was approximately 13 to 14 years old. Her face displayed a remarkable blend of primitive and modern features. Her jaw retained many ancient characteristics, while her skull showed signs of evolving toward the anatomy of modern humans. Now, with the discovery of 11 additional skeletons, that evolutionary picture has become clearer than ever. But the story doesn't end there. As many of you probably know, most scientists have long believed that Homo sapiens first appeared in Africa more than 300,000 years ago, before beginning to spread across Eurasia roughly 60,000 to 100,000 years ago. So if a population in China was already displaying transitional evolutionary traits during that same period, could it mean that the story of human evolution is still missing a very important chapter? That's precisely the question that has captured the attention of researchers around the world. According to Wu Xiuji, the leader of the excavation team from the Institute of Vertebrate Paleontology and Paleoanthropology at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the 11 newly discovered individuals most likely belong to an extended family of around 20 people who once lived inside this cave. What's even more interesting is that their lives appear to have been far more organized than many people imagine when they think about prehistoric humans. Inside Hualongdong Cave, archaeologists found evidence that the inhabitants clearly divided their living space into different functional areas. The Egyptian mummy of a young woman killed by an axe left archaeologists horrified. Do you believe that a mummy lying silently for 2,600 years could still speak and tell the story of the final moments of its life? It may sound unbelievable, but thanks to modern technology, what once seemed impossible has become reality. And what scientists uncovered was even more terrifying than any legend from ancient Egypt. The central figure of this story is Takabuti, one of ancient Egypt's most famous mummies. She was the first Egyptian mummy ever brought to Northern Ireland following the wave of mummy trading that took place after the Napoleonic Wars, and her coffin was opened for the first time in 1835. Since then, Takabuti has been displayed at the Ulster Museum in Belfast, where she has become one of the museum's most captivating exhibits. For nearly 2 centuries, all people knew was that Takabuti was a woman who had lived in Thebes and that she may have been the wife or mistress of a nobleman. The hieroglyphic inscriptions on her coffin revealed little more than that, while the story of her life and death remained shrouded in mystery. Everything changed in April 2021 when scientists conducted a new investigation using advanced technologies, including CT scanning, radiocarbon dating, and DNA analysis. What they discovered exposed a horrifying secret. Can you guess what happened? For many years, researchers believed Takabuti had died from illness or natural causes, but the CT scan revealed a completely different story. She did not die peacefully. Scientists found an injury on her back, and most terrifying of all, they determined that the fatal wound had been inflicted by an axe, a weapon commonly used by both Egyptian soldiers and the Assyrian army in ancient warfare. In other words, Takabuti was most likely the victim of a violent murder. A single blow from that axe appears to have been enough to end her life. Who killed her, however, remains a mystery to this day. But that wasn't the final surprise. During the DNA analysis, researchers uncovered another astonishing detail. Takabuti's genetic profile showed more similarities to modern Europeans than to present-day Egyptians. Isn't that difficult to explain? Here was a woman who lived in Egypt more than 2,000 years ago, yet her DNA appears to share characteristics more commonly associated with modern European populations. This discovery has opened the door to numerous new theories about ancient Egypt, including ideas involving population movement, intermarriage, and ancestral origins, possibilities that scientists had never seriously considered before. Even today, Takabuti remains at the Ulster Museum, while researchers continue to examine every tiny detail of her body, hoping that one day they will completely unravel the mystery surrounding both her life and her violent death. So what do you think? Who was responsible for murdering Takabuti? Was she the victim of a struggle for power, a robbery gone horribly wrong, or simply a personal tragedy that history buried for 2,600 years? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Who knows? One of today's theories might become an important piece of the puzzle that brings us one step closer to solving an ancient murder case that has remained unsolved for more than 2.5 millennia. After all, our world is still filled with countless mysteries waiting to be discovered, isn't it? The skeleton of a young woman in Spain reveals the secret of a human species that vanished 850,000 years ago. Did you know that hundreds of thousands of years ago, Earth wasn't inhabited by just one human species like it is today? In fact, if you could travel back about 850,000 years, you would very likely encounter humans who knew how to make tools, hunt, and survive in a challenging world. But they weren't Homo sapiens. They belonged to an entirely different human species, one that eventually disappeared from history as though it had never existed. The story begins in early 2024, when archaeologists from the Catalan Institute of Human Paleoecology and Social Evolution, IPHES, continued excavations at the TD6 site inside Grandalina Cave, part of the world-famous Atapuerca archaeological complex in northern Spain. For decades, Atapuerca has been recognized as one of the most important places on Earth for studying human origins. Yet even the most experienced researchers never expected this excavation to produce a discovery that would capture the attention of the entire scientific community. At first, they noticed only a few small bone fragments emerging from the ancient layers of sediment. No one could say with certainty what they had found, but as the excavation continued, more and more fossils began to appear. Fragments of a skull, 2 pieces of a lower jaw, several vertebrae, part of a wrist bone, and even a well-preserved incisor gradually emerged from the ground after surviving for hundreds of thousands of years. When researchers reconstructed and analyzed all of the recovered bones, they reached a remarkable conclusion. Every fragment belonged to the same individual, a woman approximately 25 years old. But what made the discovery truly extraordinary was that she wasn't Homo sapiens. She belonged to Homo antecessor, an ancient human species that became extinct long ago. Isn't that fascinating? We often think of human history as a simple story leading directly to modern humans. But in reality, the human evolutionary tree is far more complicated. Numerous human species once shared the Earth, and Homo antecessor remains one of the most mysterious among them. Dating analysis indicates that this woman lived approximately 850,000 years ago. That means she existed hundreds of thousands of years before Homo sapiens first appeared. Her remains are also among the oldest human fossils ever discovered in Europe. What particularly interests researchers is the position of Homo antecessor on the human evolutionary tree. For many years, scientists believed this species represented the last common ancestor shared by Homo sapiens and the Neanderthals. However, research conducted over the past several years has significantly changed that view. According to the hypothesis that now has the strongest support among researchers, Homo antecessor was not our direct ancestor. Instead, it was a separate evolutionary branch that split away from the common lineage shortly before Neanderthals emerged. In other words, they were more like very distant cousins of modern humans. That makes this new discovery even more valuable, because every bone fragment represents another missing piece of humanity's evolutionary puzzle, a puzzle that spans millions of years. And that's not all. For many years, the Atapuerca region has continued to produce astonishing archaeological discoveries. Long before the remains of this young woman were uncovered, archaeologists had already found numerous stone tools crafted by Homo antecessor. The manufacturing techniques used to create these tools closely resemble those found in tool assemblages dating to approximately 1 million years ago, discovered throughout Western Europe. This suggests that Homo antecessor once lived across large parts of Europe. They knew how to manufacture tools, adapt to their environment, and sustain their way of life for hundreds of thousands of years. And yet, they disappeared. To this day, scientists still cannot say with certainty what caused this human species to become extinct. Were they unable to adapt to changing climates? Or were they gradually replaced through competition with other human species? The answer remains one of archaeology's greatest unsolved mysteries. What's even more fascinating is that when Homo sapiens appeared more than 300,000 years ago, we were still not alone on Earth. According to numerous studies, at least 8 or 9 different human species were living in various parts of the world at that time. Over tens of thousands of years, every one of those species eventually disappeared. Only Homo sapiens survived. Just imagine for a moment. If history had unfolded differently, would modern humans still be the only species dominating this planet? Or might we still be sharing Earth today with some of our distant human relatives? Researchers believe that Homo antecessor, whose name means the pioneer in Latin, lived on Earth between approximately 1.2 million and 800,000 years ago. This species was first discovered at Grandolina Cave in the Atapuerca Archaeological Complex in 1994. And in 1997, it was officially recognized as a distinct human species. Perhaps this 850,000-year-old woman is telling us more than the story of a single individual who lived and died long ago. Perhaps she is reminding us that the history of human evolution is still filled with enormous gaps, and perhaps beneath what appear to be ordinary layers of rock and soil around the world, there are still discoveries waiting to be uncovered. Discoveries powerful enough to force us to rewrite everything we think we know about human origins. What do you think? Do you believe there are still major chapters of human history waiting to be discovered? Don't hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. The nearly 2,000-year-old Roman mummy that still has hair and an ear, an unsolved mystery, near Pompeii. An ancient Roman tomb was discovered containing not only a few dry bones, but also hair still attached to the skull, and even one ear still intact after nearly 2,000 years. Sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it? Yet this discovery actually happened just outside the ancient city of Pompeii, Italy, which was famously buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. Archaeologists uncovered a tomb so unusual that it immediately raised new questions about ancient Roman burial practices. What makes the discovery even more interesting is that the man in the tomb had died before the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, meaning he was not one of the famous victims preserved by volcanic ash. And yet, nearly 2 millennia later, his body was preserved in a way that even experts could not immediately explain. The discovery took place during excavations at the Porta Sarno necropolis, located just outside the Porta di Nola gate of Pompeii. This area was known as the resting place of many individuals of high social status in Roman society. But among the many ancient graves, one tomb stood out and forced researchers to stop and take a closer look. Inside, they found a small rectangular chamber, whose outer walls still preserve traces of blue paint and plant motifs painted nearly 2,000 years ago. Even that alone suggested the tomb's owner was someone of considerable importance. But what shocked researchers most was what lay inside. Within a sealed wall niche beneath the vault was the partially mummified remains of a man. Remarkably, his short-cropped hair was still clearly visible, and one ear remained attached to the skull. After nearly 2 millennia, these soft tissues should have long since decomposed. Isn't that strange? At the time, cremation was the most common burial practice in Pompeii under Roman customs, so even a full-body burial was rare, let alone one where so much physical detail remained preserved. Based on inscriptions found on the tomb, archaeologists identified the man as Marcus Venerius Secundio, who died at around 60 years of age. His life was just as remarkable as his tomb. Historical records and inscriptions reveal that Marcus had once been a slave serving at the temple of the goddess Venus. After many years, he was granted freedom and gradually rose in social status. Eventually, he became a priest in the imperial cult, performing rituals honoring Emperor Augustus, the first emperor of the Roman Empire. A journey from slavery to priesthood and wealth was far from common in Roman society, but the story doesn't end there. The inscriptions also revealed another crucial detail. Marcus organized performances conducted in both Latin and Greek. It may sound ordinary at first, but experts say this is the first direct evidence that Greek language performances were ever held in Pompeii. This suggests a highly open society where multiple cultures coexisted and influenced one another. Gabriel Zuchtriegel, director of the Archaeological Park of Pompeii, stated that this discovery provides valuable insight into the rich cultural life of the city before it was destroyed by the volcano. Inside the tomb, archaeologists also found several valuable artifacts, including fragments of preserved fabric and 2 small glass vessels known as unguentaria. These were commonly used by Romans and Greeks to hold perfumes or scented oils used in funerary rituals. They also discovered 2 wine containers, including a stunning blue glass vessel bearing the name of a woman called Novia Amabilis. These objects show that Roman funerary rituals were carried out with great care and ceremonial importance. However, the biggest mystery still remains unanswered. Why was Marcus Venerius Secundio not cremated like most residents of Pompeii? Was his body naturally preserved due to unique conditions inside the tomb, or was some unknown embalming technique used that has been lost to history? To this day, scientists continue to investigate in hopes of finding a definitive answer. We hope that these mysterious archaeological discoveries we've just explored have given you a completely new perspective on human history. Every skeleton, every mummy, and every ancient tomb feels like a message from the past, reminding us that countless secrets are still buried deep underground, waiting to be uncovered. Which discovery surprised you the most? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Ancient History, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next fascinating journey of discovery. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.